There is a gentleman by the name of William D. Lee, who happens to be a Rear Admiral in the Coast Guard. I say happens to be because by his own words he sees himself as, quote, a man of deep, abiding faith who happens to wear a uniform. This suggests to me that he sees his inclusion in the military as secondary to his Christianity. I admire this. It means we can discuss ideas about religion as equals, without having to worry about ensuring we give proper deference to rank. So as long as we remain speaking about faith, our being in the military need not enter into our calculations or our thoughts. And while my comments are most easily applicable to the Abrahamic religions, analogies for other faiths could be fairly easily made. Admiral Lee spoke last Thursday, the 2nd of May, at the Cannon House office building in Washington, D.C., as part of an observance of the National Day of Prayer. During his remarks, he expressed concern over his ability to evangelize and proselytize to subordinate members of the military, and specifically those under his command, when he decides they need to hear about his beliefs. He gave the example of a person who had tried to kill themselves but failed, and so he gave them a Bible. In reflecting on this and other similar matters, he commented that in these it was his, quote, right under the Constitution to tell a young man that there is hope. Well, that's rather odd. I don't recall anyone saying telling a person there is hope would be wrong. Oh wait, I'm sorry. He meant that as a way of saying his religion should give them hope. And at this point, we aren't simply sharing a belief or stating I believe in X. There's the implicit I believe this and you should too in order to have hope. I would think that in a case of being in a position of authority over an emotionally vulnerable person, one would not try and take advantage of the situation to win a convert. But I'm also under no illusions that my morals and ethics of how to deal with such persons are shared by all. But I digress. He thought it was his right, and I think he is mistaken, that it is not his right to say anything that crosses his mind, that unlike civilians, service members have more restrictions on our speech, and that when placed in positions of authority over others, there are even more. And these restrictions exist because those who we are given authority over have even greater restrictions and heavier repercussions on them if their speech displeases us. For example, regular citizens enjoy freedom of speech that service members do not. Ours is much more restricted. If a civilian was to tell their boss to go to hell, the government isn't going to lock them up. The government couldn't actually, since that person enjoys the freedom of speech. Their boss may fire them, they may lose their job, but the government is not going to imprison them. Yet, if one of his subordinates or one of mine was to tell me or him to go to hell, the government can punish them, and not simply with a firing. No, that person may be imprisoned for their speech, because it is insubordinate, rude, or disrespectful. And if the admiral happens to be on a boat at sea, the accused could not even demand a trial by court-martial, which to the uninformed is similar to a jury trial, yet still significantly different. So as I said, while that civilian may risk being fired by their boss, the admiral myself could seek to have the employee imprisoned. And because those under our commands have such restricted rights to express displeasure, our rights are also limited. We must ensure the ground upon which our words tread do not impose upon their rights, and as a commander, or even simply an officer, he must not be seen as suggesting adherence to a particular faith, or any faith, or even that they should reject faith in general, is expected. But for the sake of argument, let's say that it is his right to share his faith with other service members. As a right, it must not be contingent upon his rank, as rights are not earned by rank. If he thinks it is his right, then he must also think it is the right of the subordinate to share their faith and beliefs also. Pretend for a moment that some admiral did share their faith with a subordinate who is in an emotionally vulnerable position, but one who disagreed with those beliefs, and didn't feel any compulsion to offer deference to the beliefs of their superior. Since expression of them is a right, we can imagine the service member responding after being gifted this Bible. This horrific book is an atrocity. It is replete with tales of rape, slavery, ethnic cleansing, and the genocidal dreams of a madman. That it was ever passed off as the inspired word of a perfectly good and perfectly just being makes a mockery of those very ideals. I believe it is a simple collection of words with no more import than any other collection of myths and fairy tales. But even if we wish to pretend it accurately describes some supernatural being, the lesson we should take is that such a creature is a cruel, malevolent dictator, the likes of which no madman on earth has ever dared dreamed of becoming. A being who promises to torture you for an unimaginable period of time, not for the actions you perform, but for the thoughts that occur in your head. Thoughts which could not occur if that same creature had not first made you, but also made you incapable of not having them. This is not a creature worthy of worship, but of eternal disdain by any person who has even a shred of decency and ideas of justice in their own head. This book may be about hope, but is a hope for perpetual, self-imposed subjugation and slavery. And the service member concludes it with throwing away the previously gifted Bible. Does anyone imagine that our hypothetical admiral would not be upset? That they wouldn't think the seaman had been rude, insubordinate, or disrespectful? That he wouldn't contemplate filing charges against this seaman for his actions? Who among us thinks the admiral would simply think the seaman was exercising his right to share his beliefs? Who would be so deluded as to think these two could continue working together, or more accurately, could imagine that sailor would not have the perpetual fear of reprisal hanging over them? Being told to be wary to avoid proselytizing not only protects his rights, but actually protects his feelings. Not sharing a belief may be a blessing in disguise. In many ways, it's rather like his genitals. If he keeps them to himself, he doesn't have to worry about people saying how silly they are.